second race weekend of the BMW IBSF Bobsleigh and Skeleton World Cup Series marked a return to Europe and a return for the first time in 3 years to the venue for the 1992 Winter Olympic Sliding Sports Albertville, LaPlagne in France. In the shadow of Mont Blanc, this track is covered, so weather plays little part in the proceedings. What does affect them is the altitude, over 1,800 metres on the long start, and the 19 turns crammed into just 1,500 metres. This is one for the long-distance runners and the drivers who like to be busy. First action was on Friday, and as ever, it was Skeleton Day. First up in the morning were the women. The lack of experience of most of the athletes in the field of the LaPlagne track had certainly shaken things up. With a long, flat start, it's a real driver's track. 19 corners crammed into just 1,500 metres of ice. Leader at this stage, 11th after the first heat, Belgium's Kim Meilmans, but Olympic champion Hannah Nijser, who had been 7th in the first run, looked to have just about enough in hand. Despite making more mistakes than we're used to seeing, the Olympic champion managed to hold on to the line, creeping in front by a few hundredths of a second, but there were still 6 sleds to go. No medals guaranteed for Nijser. In only her second World Cup start, America's Mystique Rowe, the reigning push start world champion, was in a top 5 position. 5th place off the second fastest start in the field. She built up a very substantial early lead over Hannah Nijser of Germany. Half a second up, a third of the way down the run. Although mistakes crept in, the speed remained in the sled. Mystique Rowe would spear through to take the lead, but there were still 4 sleds to go. Matt Antoine, the coach, celebrating a great run from the woman who'd been 19th on her debut in Altenburg in January this year. After Jane Channel of Canada slipped out of podium contention, we were down to the final 3, and a new name, if not a new face. Jacqueline Lurling from Winterberg has become Jacqueline Pfeiffer after getting married, but she has lost none of her speed. Not in the start area, which was never her strength, but on the run down the track. The tall Winterberg slider's aerodynamic form rarely deserts her, and that's where she makes her speed. The 2017 world champion, who's only done 2 World Cup races in the last 2 calendar years, slipped to second place. Rowe led with 2 to go. Would Pfeiffer get a medal? Also in her second race in the World Cup, Tabby Sturker. In Winterberg in January, she'd finished a fine 7th place, but second after the first heat was uncharted territory. Junior World Championship silver medalist, she was the runner-up in the Europe Cup Racing Series last year, and in her second World Cup outing showed maturity beyond her years. She took the lead with 1 sled remaining. 2 near rookies on the podium. What an astonishing race this was turning into. The first round leader was the Netherlands' Kimberly Bos, by far the more experienced of the duo. She only had 400s in hand over Tabby Sturker from the first heat, but with an Olympic bronze medal and a World Championship silver medal, as well as a World Cup title in the 2 years, she is in the form of her life. She doesn't have the speed at the start, and when errors like that creep in down the run, it makes it really hard to hang on. Kimberly Bos dropped to 3rd at the line as a shocked Tabby Sturker claimed victory. Mystique Rowe in the silver medal position, both of them in their second World Cup races. With 50 more races under her belt, Kimberly Bos takes the bronze medal, and she'll be happy with her first podium of the season behind our jubilant winner, Tabby Sturker. Tina Hermann retains the World Cup lead, but the day belongs to our former trapeze artist.
There's more where that came from.
After a surprise first-time winner in the women's race, what would the men's competition offer us? Great Britain's Marcus Wyatt was one of 3 British skeleton sliders in the top 5 after the first of the 2 heats. Italy's Amedeo Bannis had upped his start performance and Wyatt did the same, creeping away from the Italian to guarantee himself a top 5 finish on the track where he finished 14th in the last World Cup race 3 seasons prior. A good run, laying down a challenge to his teammates with whom he was in a fierce battle for the bronze medal, covered by just 0.09 of a second. 3 years ago, Craig Thompson of Great Britain finished in 21st place and missed the cut for the second heat, 4th after the first run. This time, there was no question of that. The question was, though, could he stay in front of Wyatt? He didn't quite find the clean lines that had promoted him to the top 4 in the first heat. There wasn't much in it, but sometimes in this sport there isn't. And it was just enough for him to drop behind his teammate at the line. Second place with 3 to go. At this stage, none of the Brits were guaranteed a medal. Matt Weston, the world champion, was 3rd after the first heat, but he was 0.28 away from the lead. Gold seemed unlikely, no matter how much he tidied up his act. But could he be the top of the British trio and claim another medal? A good clean run, eradicating some of the previous errors, left him handsomely ahead. Guaranteed at least a bronze medal, the leader in a British 1-2-3 with only 2 sleds remaining. The reigning world champion led, the reigning Olympic champion was next up. 2nd after the first heat, World Cup points leader, the winner in Beijing, the season opener, Christopher Grotehair, was just 0.08 away from gold. And he makes his speed down the ice rather than in the start area, giving away 0.3 of a second to Jung Seung-hui in the first heat hadn't stopped him nearly reeling in the Korean. But he was in the red behind Matt Weston. Would he even take a silver medal? Grotehair came across the line 1/4 of a second back, tied to the 100th with Marcus Wyatt. Already there were 3 medals to be given out. And Jung Seung-hui was yet to go. An astonishing 7-year-old start record breaking first heat getaway was improved on by 100th in the second. 2 start records in a day is something that he will remember for a long time. But there was more to come. He led the first heat, and if there were nerves, they didn't really show. Yes, there were a couple more errors, but none of them critical, and he raced to his first ever World Cup victory on the 1992 Olympic track, to the jubilation of Jeff Payne and the other Korean coaches. A first Korea World Cup win with the world champion in second and the Olympic champion sharing 3rd with Marcus Wyatt. What a day for Jung Seung-hui, who now moves up to 2nd in the overall standings. A relatively clear Saturday morning saw women's monobob come to the track with no fewer than 5 newcomers to the World Cup in the field. 0.15 of a second off the lead after the first heat, Switzerland's Melanie Hassler. She was in 7th position, reflecting how tightly packed the field was at the sharp end. Lisa Buchwitz of Germany had put in another strong start and a good run down, but Hassler, who started 1/10 of a second behind, would need to really find something special. She had great speed down the track and great lines as well. Opening up the margin from her German rival, she crossed the line with a brand new track record. Next up, Andrea Grecu of Romania. Starting a phenomenal 6.85, second fastest start at a competition. Grecu on a track that she has raced before, unlike quite a number of her rivals, after the top 6 run in the first heat was just 100th ahead of Hassler. But that tiny advantage soon disappeared, and she was in the red by the time she got to the line, dropping a spot with 5 to go. 5th after the first run, Keisha Love, the rookie driver in her first season as a World Cup driver, blew the start record out of the water. But starting isn't enough. On this driver's track with 19 corners in its 1500 meters, it's all about getting the line right. Her first run had been good enough to be within a 10th of the leader, and her second run was absolutely superb. As she crossed the line, it was another brand new track record. Australia's Bree Walker was tied for the silver medal after the first heat, 200ths off the lead. Her first heat advantage over Melanie Hassler of only 800ths of a second disappeared at the start, and then unexpected errors crept into the Aussie's drive. 12 wins among her 22 Monobob podiums in her career so far, but at the track where she first raced as a driver in bobsled 6 years ago, this was not to be a lucky day for Brianna Walker. But it was for Keisha Love. As the Aussie stumbled, Love was in the medals in her first race. World champion Lara Nolte, 200ths off the lead in the first heat, would surely now move into prime position. But starting 2900ths of a second slower than Keisha Love did not help the 800ths advantage that she'd had over the American in the first heat. She would need to be flawless now with a new track record to take the lead, but that record was not coming in the second run. Lara Nolte, like Brianna Walker before her, dropping behind and down into 4th position. Tied exactly to the 100th again with Walker, Love still led 1 to go. We knew we would have an American winner, but would it be first-time driver Keisha Love or returning ace Alana Myers-Taylor? She too starting her first World Cup Monobob race, and her 800ths advantage over Keisha Love evaporated quickly as well. Alana finding herself a quarter of a second in the red midway through the run and struggling to stay in medal contention. A top 3 finish eventually eluded her. Alana would come across the line in 4th as Keisha Love claimed a sensational victory. Melanie Hassler and Andrea Grecu both also took their first Monobob World Cup medals, but it's win number 1 on day 1 of her career for Keisha Love, the new World Cup points leader. The snow would not affect the two-man race on Saturday afternoon, with Hansi Lochner looking to continue his dominant form in the discipline. After the first of the 2 heats, 22-year-old German driver Adam Amor and his 30-year-old brother Isam were in 9th position, 6200ths off the lead. Only their 3rd race together, they were challenging the very fastest starters, and a scintillating second drive by Adam would put them right in contention to move up the tightly packed top 10. They were in a tie with Patrick Baumgartner of Italy after the first heat for 9th position, but 4 sleds in front of them looked like vulnerable targets. And so it was to prove. The brothers were still in the leader's box as we got to the top 4 sleds. Francesco Friedrich won here in Europe Cup in 2012, won in World Cup in 2015 and in 2020. He is the man to beat in LaPlagne, but he was not even in the medals after the first heat, 2600ths off the lead. He had a handy advantage though over the Amor brothers, and with Torsten Margis on the back of the sled for the first time here in LaPlagne, a good start and a good drive from Friedrich gave them a shot at the medals. A German 1-2 with 3 sleds remaining. In third place after the first heat, remarkably, Frankie Del Duca. The American starting only his sixth two-man race. With the speed of Hakeem Abdul-Sabur behind him, he'd been just 14 hundredths off the lead after the first trip down the mountain. But he couldn't match that in the second drive. He slipped behind Francesco Friedrich from the start, and thereafter it was tough work to try and keep the German in sight. Nevertheless, a great second run kept him in second position. With just two more sleds to go, the hope of a medal remained. After the first of the two heats, the top two sleds were separated by just 300ths of a second. Absolutely nothing. Mickey Vogt and Sandra Mickel of Switzerland knew they had a chance. First, they'd have to improve their start, which they did, and then Vogt would have to drive up a storm, which he also did, leaving Friedrich trailing increasingly distant in the rear-view mirrors. Vogt was absolutely in top form on the track where he claimed his first ever World Cup medal, a bronze, back in 2015. He would do better than that as he took the lead with just one sled to go, guaranteed at least a silver. The first heat leaders were world champions Johannes Lochner and Georg Fleischhardt, but disaster struck at the start. Hansi didn't have his hands on the D-rings as they loaded into the sled. It kicked sideways and hit the wall, and from there on he was bleeding speed all the way down the track. They have raced together 7 times, they have won together 7 times in the two-man, but this is the end of the streak. Nevertheless, he had plenty of speed on hand, recovered well from that unfortunate starting error to end up with the silver medal as Vogt and Mickel took a historic first win in the two-man in the World Cup. The LaPlagne weekend continued to produce first-time winners with the two-man bobsleigh.
Let's go, Andy.
Lochner retains a slender World Cup points lead, but at the scene of their first ever medal together, no doubting how delighted our winners were. Sunday morning and women's bobsleigh first on the ice, and after the dramas of the Monobob, would things settle down even slightly? After taking a silver medal in the previous day's Monobob, Melanie Hassler was back for Switzerland with Mara Morell on the sled. They were 6th after the first heat, found a little bit more from their start in the second on the long, flat getaway here in LaPlagne. And another sterling drive from Mel Hassler put them right in contention, not just to hang on to the top 6, but potentially to try and move up the order. Buoyed by her own Monobob success and brakewoman Nadia Pasternak delivering her first baby during the evening, she raced to the fastest trip down the mountain thus far. Next up, Alana Myers-Taylor, tied for 4th after the first heat. Alana took a bronze medal on this track in 2012, won here in 2015, spent last year away from the ice as she had her second baby, and now with 2 preschool kids in LaPlagne, back and at her very best. Having missed out on a Monobob medal, she was determined to try and get onto the podium for a 3rd successive time in women's bobsleigh. And a great run to distance herself from Melanie Hassler looked as though she might just be able to do so. In her first weekend as a World Cup driver, America's Keisha Love had claimed Monobob gold on Saturday. Sunday morning saw her and rookie brakewoman Azaria Hill in the top 3, just 600ths off the lead. But a couple of crucial errors crept into her run, and she was not quite able to stay in front of her teammate. At the end, with 2 to go, it was a US 1-2. Alana Myers-Taylor guaranteed another medal in LaPlagne. Keisha Love would have to wait to see if a second medal of the weekend would come her way. The top 2 sleds were both from Germany. Kim Kalicki with Leonie Fiebig improved their start to a 6:41, the fastest of the competition. Fiebig had her first ever World Cup medal on this track in 2015 and has not been off a World Cup podium ever since. Kielicki has an astonishing record as well. Only 4 times in her career has she finished off the podium. She had enough in hand to take the lead away from Alana Myers-Taylor and guarantee herself at least a silver medal. She'd have to wait another 2 minutes to find out whether that would become gold. The final sled, Lara Nolte and Nele Schouten. Nolte, the Olympic bobsleigh champion, was the winner in the World Cup race here back in 2020, her first season on ice. Her first heat advantage of 0.05 of a second was eradicated by a slightly slower start than Kielicki and Fiebig, but thereafter she worked hard to limit the damage. If you don't have the speed at the start, you have to work very hard indeed to allow the sled to build that speed further down the run. But she was in the red all the way, not by much, but by a little, until out of the final corner and across the line into the green, winning it by 0.12 of a second. First win of the season for Lara Nolte, with Nele Schouten, Nolte's 12th World Cup gold, a 4th for her brakewoman. Kim Kielicki took a solid silver medal. Alana Myers-Taylor once more on the podium behind the happy winners. And that's how the World Cup rankings are reflected. Nolte leads as we head to Innsbruck next week. On a beautiful alpine afternoon, the 4-man competition took to the ice to round out the weekend, the 3rd round of their World Cup campaign. After the first of the 2 heats, the 3 Swiss sleds were lying between 5th and 7th position. 2-man gold medalist Mickey Vogt was tied for 5th with his own teammate Cedric Follador, and they too were just 600ths ahead of Simon Friedli in the 3rd Swiss sled. Vogt found a little less speed at the start than Friedli, but he managed to drive himself back into contention by the midway point, and a tidier bottom end to the run saw him extend a slender advantage. He'd come down 1100ths quicker than his teammate, taking the lead with 5 sleds still to go. The best of the Swiss sleds in Heat 1, Cedric Follador, had fallen by the wayside, leaving Vogt as the leader when we got to the top 4. Lavius Emiltsopoulos had just 0.03 of a second in hand, and although the top of the run looked tidy, the further down he got, the more wayward the sled became. Little errors crept in, a couple of high swooping turns, and suddenly the speed was gone. Critical slide uphill from 18 to 19 meant that he would be behind at the line by a whisker. Vogt still led, 3 to go. Johannes Lochner won both 4-man races and the 2-man gold medal in Beijing, but he was not having it all his own way here in LaPlagne. At 1,800 metres above sea level, it's hard work for everybody. The crew pulled out an even quicker start than in the first heat to match the getaway of first-round leader Francesco Friedrich and his team, and Lochner would try and carve into the 0.3 of a second deficit to his fellow German rival. He extended his advantage handsomely over Mickey Vogt, 1,200ths in the first heat, nearly tripled in the second. Lochner would take a medal, but of what colour? 2 to go, and another German sled, this time Adam Amor. With brother Issam, they had just failed to grab a medal in the 2-man the previous day, but with Benedikt Hertel, Nick Stadelman and Rupert Schenk behind him, he was intent on trying to hold off Johannes Lochner. They didn't have quite the speed of Lochner's team at the start, and he doesn't have quite Lochner's depth of knowledge on which to draw. The gap was tiny, but he was in the red, and a mistake on the run to the final corner only compounded that. He too would take a medal, guaranteed at least a bronze, with Lochner still leading and 1 to go. The final sled, Francesco Friedrich. with regular brakemen Torsten Margis and Alexander Schuller, joined by new boy Felix Straub on the back handles. They were targeting the 5:73 start record set by Martin Annen of Switzerland in 2002. In 2020, they tied it. It was a little warm to beat it today, but that was just part of the program. What they were really trying to do was claim their first win of the season, and the crew gave Friedrich everything he needed to race away to victory for the first time in the 23-24 calendar. It's his 28th four-man gold, his 50th four-man World Cup medal, 25th win for Torsten Margis, a 23rd for Alexander Schuller, and a first win for new boy Felix Straub. Lochner still leads the World Cup standings, with Friedrich hot on his heels as they head to Innsbruck in a week. The end of a remarkable race weekend at LaPlagne that had seen the deck shuffled much more than once. Very few drivers know this track intimately, and that always brings surprises. Next up, Innsbruck and the well-known Eagles track.